it's Sydney, and I'm here to answer some of your guys' questions about the SARS CoV-2 virus. So to start off, I think it'd be best to just talk about what they've been finding and how this virus is spreading. And so the main source of spread is through respiratory droplets, which occur when a person coughs or sneezes or is even talking. So that's why we see all these signs about maintaining social distancing, because if a person is a carrier or does have this virus, you want to make sure that you're not in close contact so that you're not inhaling all those respiratory droplets. So one of the questions you guys asked was, if you sneeze onto your hand and you have the virus, and how many people could you potentially spread this to? And I think, so we're going to pretend that my hand is covered in wet paint, and that wet paint is going to be the viral particles. So if I go and I give someone a high five, they're going to get the wet paint on their hand as well. And then anyone I come into contact to is going to get this wet paint. And similar on, anyone they come in contact to could potentially get this wet paint as well. So if you do sneeze on your hand, you can very easily spread it to anyone that you are coming in contact with. However, just because the virus is on your hand doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to get infected. You would have to rub your eyes or touch your nose. It would have to gain entry into your body somehow, so that is why you're also seeing organizations like the CDC and the World Health Organization say to make sure not to touch your face, to be washing your hands consistently, because on the off chance that you did get the virus and it's on your hand, you don't want to give it an entry into your body and cause infection.
Your question is also partially answered by looking at data that we have from the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control. And what you can see on this Information is Beautiful website is this particular figure shows on the x-axis here, on average, the number of people that one infected person will infect. So if we look at this axis, if a disease sits right here, it means that if you're infected, on average, you infect 2 other people. And this is true of the common cold, you can see there. But notice on the y-axis, that's how many people will die, of the people you infected, the number of people or the percentage of people that will die. And so, of course, with the common cold, you might on average infect 2 people, but 0% of them will die. And this is very different than something like Ebola. Notice up here, on average, an infected person may infect just over 2 people, but 50% of those people or half of those people will die. So if we find COVID-19 on this, we can see that we're not 100% certain yet exactly what that R0 value or the number of people on average who are infected by a single infected person, but we think that it's somewhere around 2.5 or 3. So this can be changed depending upon you. So the more you wash your hands, the less people you will infect. If you're infected, the more you wear a mask, the less people you'll infect. So the more mask wearing, the more outdoor activity, the more we wash our hands or wear gloves, the lower we can bring that number, the number of people on average whom we infect.
This is a really good visual I found that is illustrating the importance of wearing a mask. Probably can't see it quite too well, but we'll start with this first one. So we have our COVID carrier, we'll call him Bob over here, and then we have our healthy person, Beth, over here. And so neither are wearing a mask, so the transmission possibility is very high, because if they're having a conversation, all those viral particles are being released into the air. If they are pretty close together, that it really increases the likelihood that Beth will inhale some of those viral particles from Ben. Now, we'll say that the COVID carrier is wearing a mask, so Ben has a mask on, Beth does not. That does decrease the probability, because Ben is not releasing all those particles into the space between them, which very much decreases the probability that Beth would inhale those. And so the transmission probability is quite low. The third situation we have here is that Bob does have a mask on, Beth also has a mask on, and we see that that is the lowest transmission probability, because they're both wearing something that is covering those particles from entering the space between them and is also filtering a little bit between both Bob and Beth. Now with that, you might think, oh, why isn't everyone just wearing a mask? Viral particles are small enough that they can still enter through your mask. So that's why it's really important that as a community, everyone is wearing a mask, because if we see it, if Bob has a mask on because he's the COVID carrier, he's not releasing those viral particles though, because he's not releasing those respiratory droplets. So that is what is really helping save Beth from getting infected with it. So even though you might think you're not sick, they have been finding a lot of people are asymptomatic carriers, which means they're not showing any symptoms, so they probably have no idea that they're sick, but they're still spreading it. So that's why it's really important when we go out, we are still wearing our masks and social distancing. And I just want to show a little experiment I did this past week. So we have 2 homemade agar plates we see here. The agar plate on the left was something that I held up to my face while I was talking, but this one I had a mask on, and so we see there's not really a lot of microbial growth. The one on the right is the agar I held up to and was talking without a mask on, and we see that the plate is just covered in growth. So we see that wearing a mask really prevents those particles from being released, which can really help stop the spread of this virus. Now, you guys asked another really awesome question, and that was, what about when we're outside? Do we still need to maintain 6 feet apart? Should we be wearing a mask? And what they're finding is that they know respiratory droplets are that main cause of spread, and there are risks associated with that. So if I'm having a conversation with someone, say it's just a quick little, hey, how's it going? All right, see you later, and I have the virus, versus I have the virus and I have an hour-long conversation with them, that longer time period is going to greatly increase their probability that they will get the virus as well. So a lot of this comes down to different factors. That first one being, how long of a time are you going to be around someone? The next one is, again, that indoor versus outdoor. So if you're outside, chances are there's a lot better air filtration, that does decrease your likelihood of getting spread because you are outside, you're not in that confined space.
Another thing that's true, especially in the summer in Wyoming, is that the sunlight when you're outdoors can be very, very intense. And SARS CoV-2 doesn't like intense sunlight. In fact, in 6 minutes in high intensity sunlight, we see a 90% decay of the virus. That is, 90% of the viral particles, the virion, are going to be no longer infectious after 6 minutes in a nice, intense summer sun. So this is another big protecting factor in outdoor environments that we aren't afforded in indoor environments. So one could say that the safe issue would be is if you were outdoors in intense sunlight and both you and the person with you are wearing masks.
And the other thing with confined spaces, if you're outside, you have way more room to move away from people. You're not all just sharing that same air in, say, if you were in the grocery store. When you're in the grocery store, the density of people in there, the more people in there, the more likely it is to have this spread, versus if you are outside and there's one other person around, that would greatly decrease your chances. And they did find, they are finding that 90% of transmissions are coming from areas indoors. So being outside does give you better protection, again, because less people around, more chance to move away, better air filtration. However, when we're outside, it is still important to make sure that we are distancing from other people, because again, I believe it was 40% of transmissions are coming from asymptomatic carriers. So you might be talking to someone and neither of you seem sick, so you're like, oh, I don't have it, I feel fine, but you could actually have the virus and not realize it and be spreading it to everyone you're coming in contact to. So while being outside does help decrease that spread, it is still important to maintain these social distancing rules. So really great questions. It is really interesting to learn about these things while we're going through this pandemic. So just make sure that you're able to share all this information that you have learned and with everyone else, and we can send you these links that we found this information. So keep asking questions, guys.